we made a mistake. We started this Pacific War series in Pacific War number 1. And I was scrolling in Kings and Generals YouTube channel and I saw Pacific War #0.1. I looked what the video is and it's shown a prologue of the start of the Pacific War. So that's the reason why we didn't saw the way the Japanese invaded China. So here, I'm reacting to Pacific War #0.1. And the next video is going to be Pacific War #0.2 until 0.7. And after that, we're going back to episode 3 of the Pacific War. I'm very sorry. I wasn't really looking at the channel. I just saw the Pacific War number 1. So I thought that that's where the series starts. But no. It starts in 0.1. It has a prologue. So like and subscribe. I got a new recording system. God damn. This is kind of a weird system. So I'm gonna start my recording. Okay. So it's recording. Like and subscribe. Let's go. Okay. I know I'm using Bandicam. Yes, Bandicam. So yeah, I'm going to react to... Oh god. I'm sorry. I'm going to react to How Europe Colonized Asia. Pacific War #0.1 documentary by Kings and Generals. Go check out Kings and Generals channel in the description down below. Let's go.
Once a land of ancient empires and legendary rulers, Asia saw itself turn into a colony of the expanding European powers in the early modern period. Drawn to the Asian silk and spice trade, their colonization efforts were initially directed to harness the continent's economic power. Eventually, the European states started to use more and more force, and by the start of the 20th century, the Eastern world would be almost entirely in the hands of colonial empires. Welcome to our quick rundown on European expansion in Asia and the Pacific. This is a prelude video to our series on the Pacific War. We'll release weekly episodes with events that started 80 years prior. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss them. We're going to talk about events that happened 80 years ago in this series, but we are still in 2021, and in 2021,
Okay, first of all, the superpowers that I know colonized Asian countries in this time was the Spanish, the British, the French, and America. That's the only, or maybe Russia too. That's the only countries that I know colonized Asia. Okay, so let's go. Episode 0.1 Imperialism in the East.
In 1492, the European discovery of the New World ushered a new age of maritime exploration. For the last century, Portuguese explorers had been already trying to bypass Muslim territories to trade directly with West Africa while also attempting to reach the Indies and its lucrative spice trade. The Portuguese sent an expedition into African waters, at last discovering that the Indian Ocean was accessible through the Cape of Good Hope. On May 20th, 1498, an expedition led by Vasco da Gama finally managed to reach India by sea. Thus, the Portuguese colonial empire was born. Soon they established entrepôts in Kochi, Calicut and Goa, later expanding their Estado da India across the region with crucial acquisitions of Diu, Daman, Pulicat, Colombo and Chittagong, among others.
Fun fact, when India got their independence, they asked for Goa to be theirs because Goa was controlled by the Portuguese. And India was threatening or asking the Portuguese for Goa. So yeah, that's just a fun fact.
In Southeast Asia, the Portuguese captured Malacca and established settlements in the Spice Islands of Solor, Ternate and Ambon, as well as on East Timor and Makassar. But they also disrupted and diverted trade in the region and spread Christianity in eastern Indonesia. Commercial contact was established with mainland realms in Southeast Asia as well, and in Burma, Portuguese mercenaries became essential for the expansion of the Tuangu Empire. In China, after a long period of conflict, the Portuguese would be allowed to establish an entrepot in Macau, while in Japan, they benefited from the state of civil war, the Sengoku Jidai, and the Chinese embargo to monopolize trade between Japan and Europe. The Portuguese also managed to spread Christianity in Japan, successfully converting one of the daimyos to Catholicism, who granted them the small fishing village of Nagasaki to act as a center of trade in the region. Although direct control of the village ended just a couple of years later, Nagasaki would nevertheless remain the main port of call for the Portuguese ships thanks to its predominantly Christian population. Meanwhile, thanks to the Magellan-Elcano circumnavigation, the Crown of Spain managed to discover and gradually colonize the Philippine archipelago.
Ferdinand Magellan, I know this guy. We learned him in our Araling Panipunan. That's our history in the Philippines. So, yeah, Ferdinand Magellan.
The Spaniards also established themselves in the Spice Island of Tidore, sparking a decade of conflicts with neighboring Portuguese Ternate that would be concluded with the Treaty of Zaragoza in 1529, granting the Philippines to Spain and the Moluccas to Portugal. From their center in Manila, Spanish colonists would go on to settle Guam and the Mariana, Caroline and Palau Islands. In 1580, the establishment of the Iberian Union led to the decline of the Portuguese Empire in the east, as England, France and the Dutch Republic began to create their own overseas empires. The Dutch would be the main culprits for the downfall of the Portuguese, successfully attacking their possessions in Asia and eventually taking control of Malacca,
I forgot about the Dutch. I forgot about them. I'm sorry.
Ceylon, the Moluccas, the southern Malabar coast, and regions of Coromandel and Surat. The initial course of action taken by the Dutch East Indies would be to found a chartered company, the VOC, and establish a colonial center in the city of Jakarta, which the Dutch renamed to Batavia. From there, the Dutch would continue to assault the commercial interests of the Portuguese, slowly expanding their control over Southeast Asia, leaving only East Timor and Macau in the hands of the Portuguese. They would also colonize the southern tip of the island of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, to use as headquarters for attacks against the Philippines. In response, the Spaniards established their own colony in the north of the island, although it was soon overtaken by the Dutch. The fate of Formosa would be finally decided when the Chinese warlord Kashinga invaded in 1661, managing to take full control of the island. Meanwhile in Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate started to show animosity towards the religious intentions of the Portuguese, leading to their expulsion in 1639 and the establishment of the Sakoku isolationist policy in Japan. Yet again, the Dutch benefited from this to establish a monopoly over Japanese trade, being the only European power to operate in Japan from the port of Deshima in Nagasaki. With the fall of the Portuguese hegemony over the east, the British and French empires would also start establishing their own chartered companies in the 17th century. Whereas the French arrived late and only established a few colonies in India, the British East India Company quickly set out to found trading posts in Sumatra, Bengal and India. From there, they established their control over Bengal, established their first colony in Malaysia with the acquisition of Penang Island, and managed to expel the Dutch from Ceylon.
First of all, looking at this colony over here, this is modern day Bangladesh. Okay, over here is like Bhutan, over there is Nepal, This is over here is Pakistan. You know, this is India. This is Sri Lanka, and over here is Myanmar. Over here. If my
Once the British had
geography is right,
a foothold over this island, they soon warred against the Kingdom of Kandy and established a protectorate over the entirety of Ceylon and the neighbouring Maldives. Following a series of conflicts with the French and Dutch empires, the British would manage to take most of their possessions in India, becoming the dominant European power in the region. Within a century, most of the Indian subcontinent gradually fell under the rule of the British East India Company, which promoted the establishment of the British Raj in 1858 to assume direct control over India. In Burma, relations with the British East India Company had always been tense after the Burmese annexation of Arakan, leading to a war in 1824. This was one of the most expensive operations of the Chartered Company, but in the end, it saw the British takeover of Manipur, Assam, Arakan and Tenasserim, as well as the birth of British supremacy in Asian coastal waters.
That's a huge colony.
A second war broke out in 1852, in which the British annexed the province of Lower Burma, leaving the Burmese state in shambles.
You in position yet?
Working on it.
Can we talk about how huge the British Raj is? This is like, how many countries are here? Pakistan, half of Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka. They didn't annex Nepal. I don't know if over here is Bhutan, but we have Bangladesh. We have Myanmar over here. Is it Myanmar? Yeah. And they got it. Oh my God, that's a huge colony by the British Empire.
In the 19th century, the British also decided to take a more expansionist role in Malaysia, sponsoring a coup in the Sultanate of Johor and founding the colony of Singapore. They would then negotiate with the Dutch for the cession of Malacca and the remaining Dutch forts in India in exchange for all British possessions in Sumatra and the recognition of Dutch rights to Indonesia.
British even got Indonesia, or maybe Malaya. I'm sorry, Malaya. Did they own Indonesia? Did they? I don't know, but I know they owned Malaya.
British Malaya would continue to grow across the century as the Straits settlements were established and the Malay sultanates were gradually annexed as protectorates. At the same time, the British established a protectorate over the Raj of Sarawak in northeastern Borneo and then established a colony on the Labuan Islands. Meanwhile, the French would take great interest in the region of Indochina. After enjoying very good relations with Vietnam, the French Empire would start to continually intervene in the country in the 19th century, culminating with an attack on Turan and the founding of the colony of Cochin China. In 1867, all of southern Vietnam fell under French control, and a protectorate over Cambodia was officially established. The French would go on to establish protectorates over the islands of New Caledonia, Tahiti, Tahuata, and Wallis and Futuna. Initially, the Tahitians would offer strong resistance against the colonists, yet they would be subdued at last, and the French would go on to expand across modern-day French Polynesia. With the British, they would also establish an Anglo-French condominium over the New Hebrides, with one English side and the other one French. Meanwhile, in China, there was an increasing demand for opium that was strongly damaging the Chinese population, prompting the Daoguang Emperor to end the opium trade with the Europeans. In response, Britain sent a military expedition in 1839, thus starting the first of the Opium Wars. The Chinese would be defeated in a humiliating way, and as a consequence, they would have to open their foreign trade with Europe and to cede the island of Hong Kong to the British Empire. Furthermore, China was left in a state of social unrest, and it would need the help of French and British troops to quell the Taiping and Nian rebellions. In 1856, another incident over opium would renew war with the British Empire. Joined by the United States and the French and Russian empires, the British would win again, further opening commercial areas in China, legalizing the opium trade, and acquiring the Kowloon Peninsula next to Hong Kong. The Russian Empire, which over the last centuries had been expanding across Central Asia and Siberia, would also go on to annex the entire region of Outer Manchuria. In 1884, the French Empire would obtain control over northern Vietnam following their victory over China in another war.
First of all, the Qing dynasty collapsed because of imperialists. Okay, I just realized, because the British, French, America, Russia, we have the Dutch, we have the Spanish. I know the Spanish isn't in here, the America, the Portuguese, but the Qing dynasty was broken up because of the imperialists. So yeah.
Thus consolidating their colony in Indochina.
French Indochina.
But the success of the French also threatened the British population in the region, prompting them to declare war against the Burmese and annex the province of Upper Burma. This left the Kingdom of Siam entirely surrounded by European powers, and the Siamese would have to relinquish some territories on the frontiers to maintain their independence. Thus, the British received the Shan states and some possessions in Malaysia, while the French enlarged their Indo-Chinese colony with the addition of modern-day Laos. In the 19th century, the Dutch also started to gradually expand their East Indies across maritime Southeast Asia, and by 1920 they had acquired the modern-day borders of Indonesia.
Wow, that's how big the Dutch is? Okay. If you don't know, even though Indonesia is broken apart, like small islands, Indonesia is huge. If you put them together, that's a huge country. So yeah.
While the British expanded into Brunei and North Borneo, and managed to colonize Fiji, Christmas Island, Cocos Islands, the Pitcairn Islands, the Union Islands, the Southern Solomon Islands, and the Gilbert and Ellice Islands.
Damn, that's a
By
lot
the
of
20th
islands.
century, Great Britain also colonized the islands of Tonga and Niue, the Phoenix Islands, and the southeastern side of the island of New Guinea. Yet the crown jewel of their oceanic empire would be the colonies of Australia and New Zealand, from where the British controlled all their Pacific possessions. At the end of the century, the assassination of German missionaries in China would spark another conflict with European powers, culminating with a scramble for concessions in 1898 that awarded the Germans with a lease over the Jiazhou Bay and Tianjin, that granted the British a lease over Weihai Wei and the new territories of Hong Kong, and that gave a lease over Guangzhou One to the French. The recently established German Empire also colonized the northeastern part of New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, the Northern Solomon Islands, Western Samoa, and Nauru.
Even the Germans are here?
Finally, the entrance of the United States into the Pacific, the last main foreign player in the region, would coincide with the downfall of the Spanish Empire.
They own
in
Cuba over
1898,
there?
the same year that the US annexed Hawaii, American intervention in Cuba led to the ultimate conquest of the Philippines and Guam in the Pacific. Weakened from their defeat against the US, the Spaniards could no longer protect their Pacific possessions, including the Mariana, Caroline and Palau Islands, so in 1889 they sold these territories to the German Empire for a significant sum of gold marks, ending the Spanish presence in the region. The start of the next century would also see an increasing American interest in the Pacific, with the colonization of Wake Island, the Midway Atoll, the Johnson Atoll, Eastern Samoa, and the Howland and Baker Islands, thus completing the colonization of Oceania. As you can see, most of Southeast Asia and Oceania were left in the hands of Western powers by the turn of the 20th century. Our Prelude series, that will soon morph into the weekly coverage of the Pacific War, We'll continue next week as we observe how the Japanese turned from an isolationist state into a regional power in the east,
Japanese
laying
Empire.
the initial groundwork for the rise of the Japanese Empire. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members.
Wow, hold on a minute. That's a lot. Wow. First of all, Asia was like getting controlled by Europeans. I'm sorry. I just ate. Wow. So, the Spanish influence got kicked out by America, sold their last islands to Germany, and to be honest with you, the winner in this imperialistic rampage is actually the Great Britain, the British Empire. The reason is they have a huge colony, like the the British Raj, Australia, New Zealand. Oh my god. So yeah guys, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. This is Pacific War #0.1, and yes, I'm very very sorry. Goodbye. Tomorrow, I don't know, should I post the 0.21 or I'll search for another video that I want to learn about, like maybe an extra credits video or an extra history one. I don't know, but thank you for watching. Like and subscribe.